الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all on this session, the 40th session, discussing the evil consequences of sins. And for those who are following the book with us, we are at page 283 in the Arabic version. In the English version, we are at page 265. In the previous two classes, we spoke about the concept of al-qalb al-salim, the sound heart, and that is the heart, the only type of heart that has any chance of success and happiness in this dunya. And we said that this is the heart that manages to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the heart that is able to march towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, connects with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this is the purpose for which the heart is created, and the heart is only content and only happy when it fulfills the job, the function, the purpose for which it was created. So when the heart is on that path, it is the only path in which it will become happy. And this is the only path in which it will avoid losses, pains, humiliation, disgrace, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says concerning Ibrahim alayhi salam in his dua, وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ. Oh Allah, do not disgrace me, do not humiliate me in the day of resurrection. And then he says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. The day in which no wealth, no children will be of any benefit, except the one that comes to Allah with a sound heart. Meaning, if you don't have a sound heart, if you have any impurities in your heart, then every little impurity in your heart will be a cause for disgrace and humiliation in the akhirah and also in this dunya. Because Ibrahim alayhi salam linked the two together. He says, oh Allah, do not disgrace me, do not humiliate me, يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ, in the day of resurrection. Okay, in the day in which only the person with a sound heart will be honored and praised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will be saved and salvaged from that disgrace. And that which causes you disgrace in the akhirah will definitely cause you disgrace in this dunya. And this is something in your journey to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need to link the two together. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about certain things in the akhirah, you have to know that they are linking to the same effect in dunya. Whoever is honored in the akhirah will also be honored in dunya. Dunya and akhirah, they are reflections of one another. So one can actually estimate how his or her akhirah will be by considering how they live this dunya. Ibnul Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, a person with a good sound heart, healthy heart, pure heart, al-qalb al-salim, this person في جنة في الدنيا قبل جنة الآخرة. This person lives in a Jannah in this dunya before he is admitted to the Jannah of Akhirah. A person with a sound heart. And then also we spoke in the previous class about 5 things that one has to be free from. One's heart has to be pure from. And this is the concept of tazkiyah. Tazkiyah is what? Purification of the heart, And then as a second step from that is disciplining of the nafs. Tazkiyatul nafs wa tazkiyatul qalb. So tazkiyatul qalb is basically purifying the heart so that it has no impurities, nothing that distracts you from being able to see Allah, connect with Allah, and march towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with righteous deeds. And then the disciplining of your nafs will become easy. Your nafs, convincing your nafs to march towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to act righteously, to avoid all the haram, to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your nafs will come with you. If the heart is good, if the heart is pure. Otherwise, the nafs will be reluctant and unwilling to march to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these diseases, these 5 concepts we spoke about yesterday in the previous class, are like blindfolds. You know, if a person has them, if you have those diseases in your heart, then they are like blindfolds that prevent you from seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously that will impact on your ability, your desire to perform any act of worship, to come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you will be affected by these blindfold and how thick they are, depending on how much of these veils you have. So he spoke previously about the 5 things being a shirk, to take partners beside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, and we spoke about what that means. In the general sense, it means believing that anyone other than Allah can benefit you or harm you. Anyone can affect you in any way but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That would be a form of shirk. Whether it is a minor shirk or a major shirk, that's another issue. But that's a form of shirk. You know, and we spoke about that quite extensively in the previous class. If you missed out on that, please, I urge you to go back to last week's class so that we avoid repetition in this class. And we also said bid'ah. Anyone who has any form of bid'ah, that will corrupt their hearts. A desire, shahwa, that instructs the heart to disobey the command. That is also one of the sicknesses, one of the diseases that will cause you to become blinded from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ghafla, a state of heedlessness. And finally, number 5, if a person is in the mindset of following their desires, hawa, ittiba'ul hawa. These 5 sicknesses, we spoke about them yesterday, last week, and we covered them quite extensively. These are the sicknesses that one has to become free from in order for them to become possessing a sound heart, a healthy heart, al-qalb al-salim. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, these 5 things, هذه الخمسة حجب عن الله. These 5 things, they are like veils preventing you from seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and marching towards him. وتحت كل واحد منها أنواع كثيرة تتضمن أفرادا لا تنحصر. And under each one of these 5 categories, you know, they're not 5 elements as in simple elements, but rather they are categories under which there are a lot of sub-diseases and sub-categories of many other diseases that fall under them. And as such, one will have a lot to purify their hearts from. Too much that sometimes it is almost difficult for you to purify your heart without the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? For example, take shirk. Let's take one shirk, how shirk can be sometimes quite difficult to discover. Shirk is when you attach yourself to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for any form of goodness. And what could come out of that is a riya, showing off people, you know, doing things, doing righteous deeds to impress people. That is riya, صح? And that could be something that you can, if you tap into your heart a little bit, you can see whether you are showing off or not. All right. But what can be a little bit more difficult sometimes to detect is sometimes when you abandon certain things, when you relinquish certain things, you know, for the sake of people, that can be difficult. You know, sometimes you find people thinking that I don't want to do this for the sake of people. But even that thing that you abandon for the sake of people, you are abandoning it for the sake of people. So you are worrying about what people say. So that's another subtle form of shirk. Right? You are either doing something for them or not doing something also for them. All right? The latter being more subtle than the former. Right? Take for example one of our greatest obligations, you know, giving da'wah, you know, giving da'wah to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being callers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, enjoining the good, forbidding the evil, you know. It is so easy to convince yourself that this is something you're doing for the sake of Allah. Right? But it might be that you're doing this because it gives you value. You feel important, you know, and without it, you are an insignificant person. Right? No one cares about you, no one thinks about you. But the minute you say, oh, that's haram, this is wajib, this is that, people begin to listen to you, and that feeds into you, you know, feeds into your ego. So you can convince yourself very eagerly that this is sincere for the sake of Allah. But in reality, maybe there is something there, you know. Sometimes there is something that is so difficult to detect, even for you. It doesn't matter how much examination you do, it may be so difficult to detect. Right? Many situations when you do certain things and you claim that you're doing this for the sake of Allah, right? And you take a stance, you take a position, you know, and you say that this is righteousness, this is the right thing to do, when in reality it is not the right thing to do. It is not the most pleasing thing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're not only dealing with 5 things, these are 5 gateways for many other illnesses and many other diseases that can fall underneath them. Okay, so Ibnul Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, you need to realize that you are in most desperation for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to assist you in the purification of your heart. This is something that is so important. It may be the only one important thing that you have to always be mindful of. Everything else you can get away with forgetting. But the minute you forget that you are desperate for Allah's aid and assistance, that's it, you lose everything. Do you understand? He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَلِذَلِكَ اشْتَدَّتْ حَاجَةُ الْعَبْدِ بَلْ ضَرُورَتُهُ إِلَى أَنْ يَسْأَلَ اللَّهَ أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. On this basis, on what basis are we talking about? On the basis that the illnesses and the diseases that you would like to, that you should want to purify your heart from, there are so many and so subtle, and there is no way for you to purify your heart on your own. You need Allah's help for this purpose. So your desperation, this is where you become so desperate for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you in as-sirat al-mustaqim. As-sirat al-mustaqim, often translated as the straight path. The straight path. And that is the path that is formed of righteousness and truthfulness and fairness and justice. That's as-sirat al-mustaqim that leads you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon as-sirat al-mustaqim. He himself is upon as-sirat al-mustaqim. And if you want to join Allah, you have to be on that straight path. Take this idea in your heart very well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon a straight path. What does that mean? Everything that Allah does is the truth. Everything that Allah does is righteous. Everything that Allah does is just and fair. Everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is out of kindness and mercy. Right? If you want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to be in the path in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that I am on this path. You want to meet me, this is where I am. Inna Rabbi ala siratin mustaqim. This is what Hud alayhi salam said. My Lord is upon a straight path. And we will come to this ayah shortly, inshallah. Right? So this is what as-sirat al-mustaqim, basically, in every little aspect of your life. Right? Pay attention to this, please. In every little aspect of your life. Don't only think about salat and Quran and hajj and fasting. No. Every second, you are in a position to take a decision, either in favor of Allah's pleasure or otherwise. You are always taking decisions. You are always thinking about something and doing something, or thinking about a situation and choosing to abandon something and do something else. You're always making choices, always making choices. Even as we stand now, in this class, you are making choices. The minute you pay attention to a verse, you chose to pay attention to a verse. You chose it. And the minute you chose to become unmindful, that was a decision. You took that decision. So there isn't any time in which you are not making a decision. Not only about salat, every little second in your day, in your life, you are making a decision. And that decision can either be righteous, upon the truth, upon kindness, upon justice, upon fairness, and then that means that you are upon a path in which you will eventually meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or it could be otherwise, in which you are drifting away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So that's why, since we are so desperate for as-sirat al-mustaqim and to be guided for it, Allah made it an obligation upon us to ask for guidance to the straight path. And that's why in the salat, it is an obligation to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And in Surah Al-Fatiha, everything about Surah Al-Fatiha is about one idea. Everything in that surah is about one thing. The central idea is what? Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Right? Everything before it is an introduction to it, and everything after it is an elaboration of it. Yeah. So the heart of Surah Al-Fatiha is Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Because you can't just ask Allah to give you something. You have to speak to Allah like how you would speak to the King of Kings. Right? So everything before Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim was an introduction. And everything after Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim was an elaboration. You know? And that's how you show your insistence that you really want this particular thing, as-sirat, guidance upon the sirat al-mustaqim. Ibn Qayyim says, فَلَيْسَ شَيْءٌ أَحْوَجَ مِنْهُ إِلَى هَذِهِ الدَّعْوَةِ. There is nothing that no one is more desperate for any one thing like man to this da'wah, to this dua. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. وليس شيء أنفع له منه. And there is nothing that can benefit you like how this one dua can benefit you. That's why I said, you know, if you forget anything else, you can afford it. You know, the damage will be manageable. But you forget about this one thing, everything will be gone. You forget about your desperation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you forget about asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid you and assist you. Even if things have previously been working out for you and they stopped working, this means that your heart has changed. There was a moment of time when you thought that you are desperate for Allah and you are begging Him, trying desperately to please Him because you felt desperate to Him. But when things started to work out for you and you started to depend on yourself, that's when Allah let go of you. And when He let go of you, everything begins to collapse, and you can see it. Everything stops to work. You know, your iman is no longer the same. Your salat is no longer the same. Your desire to read Quran is no longer the same. Your ability to memorize Quran is no longer the same. You know, everything that you were used to previously started to fall apart. Why is this? You've forgotten about this one idea, that you are desperate for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you guidance. If He doesn't guide you, you're gone. Huh? Yeah, that's a form of shirk as well. You know, thinking that somebody else other than Allah can give you guidance. And in this instance, you're thinking that you are capable of guidance, you know. And guidance is two types. Guidance that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, as Ibn Qayyim states, hidayah, when we say ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, hidayah al-dalala wal-irshad, the guidance of merely directing people to the path, telling them this is right and this is wrong, you know, knowing what is it that you should do and what is it that you should abstain from. That is called a type of guidance called hidayah al-dalala wal-irshad, you know, the guidance of direction, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just points you into the direction in which you are able to know what is right and what's wrong. But there is another type of guidance, and that's the guidance of tawfiq. At-tawfiq was-sadad wal-awn, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aids you, supports you, inspires you, removes obstacles from your path, facilitates things for you, you know, and you begin to see things working out for you. You know, you see your nafs coming along with you without reluctance, without laziness. You know, you no longer have to force yourself to do anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates for you things for you. This is called hidayah to what? Hidayah to tawfiq. You know, and that's why we should always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for hidayah to tawfiq as well. And whoever is granted tawfiq is also granted the first type of hidayah, hidayah to ad-dalala wal-irshad. And that's why when you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Fatiha, you should be mindful that what you're asking for is actually both of them. for Allah not only to guide you to the straight path, but rather to it and on it, to stay with you on the straight path as you do the righteous deeds, inspire you, support you, facilitate for you. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, فَإِنَّ الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ يَتَضَمَّنُ. You know, what's upon the sirat al-mustaqim? So now you know that as-sirat al-mustaqim is basically every little action you do, every little choice you do is going to mean you are either on a path leading you to Allah, and that's as-sirat al-mustaqim, or in a path taking you away from Allah, meaning you missed out either on Allah's guidance or Allah's support and aid, right? So he says, فَإِنَّ الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, being upon the straight path, this entails the acquisition of ulum, to have knowledge, ilm, to know what is right, what is it that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And don't get this wrong, wallahi, it's not easy. A lot of the times you may find yourself learning a lot of Islamic knowledge, right? But you don't know how to implement it. You don't know how is it relevant to you. And when it comes to it, you come to making a decision, you find yourself unable to see which piece of knowledge is relevant to what circumstance and what situation. So ilm, to begin with, that is something you're desperate for. Right? So as-sirat al-mustaqim entails or comprises of ulum, the acquisition of ilm, to have ilm, to have knowledge. Wa irada, also to have a desire and a will. Irada means what? To have a will, a desire, a will that has desire to it. That's what irada is. To have desire, because you might have ilm, you might have knowledge that you should wake up for Fajr, but you don't have the will, you don't have the irada to wake up. Either your willpower is weak, or you don't have love for it, you don't enjoy it as much, right? Also, there are turuk, there are a'malan, uluman wa iradatan wa a'malan. You know, when you have a desire or a will, you also have the amal. Is everybody who has knowledge of a particular righteous deed and has desire for it, is everybody able to execute it? Is everybody able to do it? No. A lot of the times we find ourselves, we know what is right, what should be done, and we desire it, we want it, but there are millions of obstacles on our path. So the amal itself is something else that we need Allah's help with. And there is turuk, he says, wa turukan. There is the relinquishing of certain evil deeds, you know, abandoning certain things. That is also a type of amal, you know, to work within your heart, to let go of something that you really wanted to do. That also is something that you need Allah's guidance for. ظاهرة وباطنة. You know, whether these a'mal or these turuk are apparent, something you do with the limbs, or something inside your heart, something that is in the inner self of a person, in your heart. And that's the more serious one. You know, work on yourself, try to recover from one bad trait that you have. You know, actively try to work on one bad trait that you have. You will realize how difficult this thing is. You know, how difficult it is to purify your heart, to overcome a certain habit. Let's say you are the type of person that has this, oh, I don't mind, you know, things will work out. You know, say you have this attitude, and just think of how and what you could possibly do to overcome this problem. You know, if you are a type of person that always thinks that, oh, it's fine, you know, you are always disregarding things and you know, marginalizing things, and you don't pay attention, you always, you know, appease yourself, pacify your worries, you know, and you don't want to do anything about anything, right? If you are this type of person, imagine how much work you have to do in order to recover from this. It's not an easy thing. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, علوما وإرادة وأعمالا وتروكا ظاهرة وباطنة تجري عليه في كل وقت. This is something that you are always doing at all times. You're either doing something or not doing something, outwardly or inwardly, at all time. He says تفاصيل الصراط المستقيم قد يعلمها العبد وقد لا يعلمها. The details, the intricate details in which you can recognize a righteous deed, there could be a lot of knowledge. You know, a lot of it you may be, some of it you will be aware of it, and a lot of it you might be unaware of it. And then he says وقد يكون ما لا يعلمه أكثر مما يعلمه. And perhaps what you are ignorant of is many more times what you are aware of. And then he says وما يعلمه قد يقدر عليه وقد لا يقدر عليه. And that which you know, you may be able to access it, you may be able to do it, or you may not be able to do it. وهو الصراط المستقيم وإن عجز عنه. Subhanallah, look at this. He says something that you are incapable of doing. You should know that you missed out on الصراط المستقيم, something that draws you close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fact that you are unable to do it, that doesn't mean that you will get away with it. You are not going to be accounted for it because you don't know or you are incapable of it, but you missed out on something that takes you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we hear Ibnul, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu says, as in Bukhari, he says, لن أدع سنة كان يعمل بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلا عملت بها فإني أخشى إن تركت سنة من سننه أن أزيغ. He says, radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he says, I will not abandon any little sunnah I know from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم except that I will act upon it. For I fear if I leave any of his sunnah, that one sunnah could be the cause of my misguidance. So the Sahaba, they used to see what? Everything that came to them from the Prophet ﷺ is essential in their guidance. And they feel that if I miss out on something, this could be the reason for my destruction, the reason for my misguidance. And that's why they have this attitude. That's why they are more keen to learn the Quran and more keen to act upon the Quran, because they feel that everything matters. Every little thing is important. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَهُوَ الصِّرَاطُ الْمُسْتَقِيمُ وَإِنْ عَجَزَ عَنْهُ. What you don't know, what you know, but you cannot act upon, you cannot act upon it. You may be excused for it, but that is still الصراط المستقيم that you missed out on. وما يقدر عليه قد تريده نفسه وقد لا تريده كسلا وتهاونا. And that which you know and that you are capable of doing, sometimes you might desire it, your nafs might want it, and sometimes your nafs may not want it. And we can all ask ourselves, how many times you have known that there is something you should do, but you just don't feel like doing. And you feel that there's nothing you can do. Your nafs has said no, you know? And how many times have you noticed that, have you known that there is something that you should not do? And deep inside of you, your aql is telling you, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But you can't help it, you still do it. Your nafs is refusing to listen to you and is rebelling against you and is doing what it wants. So that's a possibility. So you know what is right to do. You know that you have it in you, you have the capability, there's no obstacles on your path, but your nafs is refusing. And then he says, وَمَا تُرِيدُهُ, and that which your nafs desires, sometimes you find that there are external obstacles preventing you from doing it. And that which you end up doing, whatever righteous deed that you know and you are capable of doing and your nafs agrees to do it, sometimes you might find that you lack sincerity in it. You know, can you see how many obstacles, how many paths, how many hurdles you have to overcome until you actually do something that is seen by Allah as a righteous deed? You know, what you end up doing eventually may be insincere, and you are totally unaware of what are the aspects that are causing insincerity in it, thinking that this is for the sake of Allah. وما يقوم فيه بشروط الإخلاص قد يقوم فيه بكمال المتابعة وقد لا يقوم. And sometimes you might do something sincerely for the sake of Allah, but you're not following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as such it will not be accepted. It has to be sincere and also according to the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that which is sincere and also in accordance to the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, A lot of the times you find people will do it in one instance, twice, 3 times, 4 times, a week, a month, and then they stop. So part of your need for Allah's guidance is to guide you into knowing what the straight path is, and then acting upon it, and then remaining firm upon it. So that's why the ulama, they said, Imam Tabari rahimahullah ta'ala, he says the meaning of ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, when he say that, oh Allah, guide us to the straight path, the first thing that comes in under that is to keep us firm upon as-sirat al-mustaqim. Because you might be wondering, how is it that we are Muslims already on the straight path, we are upon Islam, how is it that we are asking Allah, ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim? He said the first thing that comes to mind when you ask this dua is that keeping you firm upon this deen. He says, وَكُلُّ هَذَا وَاقِعٌ سَارٍ فِي الْخَلْقِ. These are all situations that a lot of people experience, and we all experience it. I mean, the stages before you actually doing something righteous, and whether you stay firm on it or not. فَمُسْتَقِلٌ وَمُسْتَكْثِرٌ. Some people, they have a lot of problems, some people have less problems, and some people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have chosen them to do good. Then pay attention to this statement. He says, وَلَيْسَ فِي طِبَاعِ الْعَبْدِ الْهِدَايَةُ إِلَى ذَلِكَ. This is something you also have to register. He says, and it's not within your powers, within your capacities as a human being, to find guidance on your own. It is not possible. Never ever think that you're gonna figure it out. You're gonna bring yourself into doing something righteous. This is something that you are just incapable of. You know? So he said, if Allah was to abandon you, to leave you to your own devices, there is no way that you can make anything work. Not purifying your heart, not disciplining your nafs. Both of them will be difficult for you. He says, بل متى وكل إلى طباعه حيل بينه وبين ذلك كله. In fact, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to let you for your own devices, then all these grades of guidance, you will be denied from all of them. And this is a concept that is also mentioned in the Quran. Take, for example, Surah Ali Imran. Ali Imran, chapter 3, verse 160. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن يَنصُرْكُمُ اللَّهُ فَلَا غَالِبَ لَكُمْ. If Allah gives you aid and victory and supports you, no one can defeat you. Nothing can overcome you. And then he says, وَإِن يَخْذُلْكُمْ. And if he was to let go of you, if he was to stop aiding you, فَمَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَنصُرُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ. Whoever can support you after Allah has abandoned you. Meaning, no one can. No one can. This concept is called al-khudlan. Al-khudlan. Na'udhu billahi min al-khudlan. Al-khudlan is when Allah decides to let go of you. Never look after you, never guide you, never protect you, never provide for you. You know, just abandon you. This is leaving you to your own devices. Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in the Madarij, he says, العبد مطروح بين الله وبين عدوه إبليس. You as a servant of Allah, you are somewhere in between Allah and your worst enemy, Iblis. This enemy that will want to destroy you. You are between Allah and your enemy. He says, فَإِن تَوَلَّاهُ اللَّهُ لَمْ يَطْفَرْ بِهِ عَدُوُّهُ. If Allah was to look after you, then your enemy will have no chance with you. وَإِنْ خَذَلَهُ وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْهُ افترسه الشَّيْطَانُ كَمَا يفترس الذئب الشاة. If Allah was to turn away from you, abandon you, then there is no savior for you against your shaitan. Your shaitan will devour you, just like how a wolf would devour a sheep. You have no chance of making it. If Allah was to leave you, you will be eaten by your enemy, just like how a wolf eats the sheep. All right? إذا خلى الراعي بينه وبينها فالشيطان ذئب الإنسان. الشيطان is the wolf of the insan. You know, if Allah looks after you, then you are protected. If Allah abandons you, then your shaitan will destroy you. Really, literally, shaitan will destroy you. and you have no power within you to defend yourself against shaitan. And that's why if the shaitan wants to have a go at you, the first thing that he has to instill in your heart is self-confidence. If the shaitan wants to sway you from the path of Allah, and if he wants to attack you and cause you harm and damage, the first thing that he has to instill in your heart, that you are good enough, you can manage. You can do it. You just need to put your mind into it. You just need to focus. You just need to put yourself together, making you think that this is all about your effort. Once you start to think like this, shaitan knows that Allah will abandon you. And once you're abandoned, shaitan will have you. Right? So you could be with Allah, working hard, trying your best, but then all of a sudden things start to change for you. The first thing that you need to be looking into is this concept. Have you started to depend on yourself? Have you started to feel that you are self-sufficient? You can do it. Things will work out if you just focus. The minute you start to work like this, then you will be left by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the dua that we all should be saying in the morning, and this is a dua that the Prophet ﷺ taught to his daughter, Fatima alayhi salam. He said to her, Ya Fatima, ما يمنعك أن تسمعي ما أوصيك به. Why wouldn't you listen to something very precious I was to give you? Right? As a way of enticing her to listen. He says, أن تقولي إذا أصبحتي وإذا أمسيتي. To say in the morning and in the evening, يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي طرفة عين. يا حي يا قيوم. حي, al-Hayy, is the self-sufficient one, the ever-living. When you say Allah is Hayy, Hayy doesn't mean that he's alive. Right? There's nothing special about him being alive, because I am Hayy and you are Hayy and everybody is Hayy. Everybody has a life. So if you praise Allah with the being in a state of a life, then that in itself is not a praise. Right? The praise is to know that this is a life that befits His Majesty, a life that has no beginning and has no end, and a life that has no interruption in the middle. Our lives has beginning and has end, and also has interruption in the middle. People die, people sleep, people become sick, people become weak, and also our life is reflected or affected by our capacities. You are alive because you move, you hear, you interact with the world around you. But you can only interact with what you hear, what you see, what you can touch. Your interaction is limited, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's interaction is unbound. So Allah has a life, but a life that befits His Majesty, where He has all the perfect attributes. So the word al-Hayy, al-Hayy means the one that has all the attributes of majesty. So it's one word, but it means that He has all the attributes of His Majesty, the full attributes of life. Right? Then al-Qayyum is the part that says that He has all the attributes to look after His creation. So He is perfect in Himself, and that's what? Al-Hayy. And He is also perfect in the way He looks after His creation, and that's what? Al-Qayyum. So when you say Ya Hayyu, Ya Qayyum, the ulama, they say these two names, they gather all the other names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the other names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fall under two categories. They are either categories or attributes and names relating to His person, His attributes, and other names and attributes relating to His action towards His creation. So these two names, they summarize all of that. Ya Hayyu, Ya Qayyum. And that's why the many ulama, they are of the opinion that the most venerated, the glorified name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Hayyu Al-Qayyum. The name, if you invoke, if you make dua with, Allah will always respond to you, is Al-Hayyu Al-Qayyum. Ibnul rahimahullah ta'ala was of that view. طيب, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum. So when you say Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, it's like you have asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with all His names and attributes. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, birahmatika astaghith. I seek refuge, I seek rescue with your mercy. I seek rescue. I want to be rescued by your mercy. And the one who asks for rescue is the one that's what? That's desperate, you know, knowing that you are drowning. You are drowning. If Allah doesn't help you, you're gone. This is how we all should feel in relation to anything we want from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah doesn't give it, we will be lost and we are going to be drowning. So we need what? We need to be rescued by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what do we say in this dua? بِرَحْمَتِكَ أَسْتَغِيث. I seek rescue in your mercy. I seek rescue in your mercy. And using the word rescue, we are trying to say that we are desperate. طيب. أصلح لي شأني كله. Oh Allah, rectify all my affairs for me. أصلح لي شأني كله. ولا تكلني إلى نفسي طرفة عين. And never abandon me and leave me to my devices, not for a blink of a second, not for a blink of an eye. طيب. Because even if that one blink of an eye, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left you for your devices, you are lost, you're gone. So he taught, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught Fatima radiallahu anha every day in the morning to say this dua. Ya hayyu ya qayyum birahmatika astaghith aslih li sha'ni kullah wa la takilni ila nafsi tarfat ayn. And this is the dua, like I said. If you have to abandon any other dua, let it not be this dua. This is dua that is going to bring into your heart your desperation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what Allah wants to see. As long as you are desperate for Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you. The minute you forget that you are desperate for Allah, you will be left for your own devices. And then everything you do will be destructive. Everything you do with your own hands, your own thoughts, thinking that you're doing well, you're doing good for yourself, it will be cause for destruction. And this ittirar, this state of being desperate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has to reflect in what? In the dhikr of Allah. If you are truly desperate for Allah, like a drowning person in the middle of the sea, who have lost all means for life, and they are clinging onto one piece of wood, otherwise they will drown. This person is desperate, right? If you are in that state, your desperation will have to reflect on your calling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'll be constantly thinking, Allah, Allah, Ya Rab, Ya Rab, Ya Rab, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. That's a desperate one. If you're not like this, then this means that you have forgotten that you are desperate. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Hadith Qudsi, He says, أَنَا مَعَ عَبْدِي مَا ذَكَرَنِي وَتَحَرَّكَتْ بِي شَفَتَاهُ. I will be with my slave, my servant, as long as he remembers me and he moves his lips with my remembrance. Why is that? Because the movement of the lips and the remembrance of Allah is an indication of desperation. And Allah is going to be with you only if you are desperate for Him. The minute you think that you're not desperate, you're let go of. In a book called Al-Wabil Al-Sayyib, one of the books of Imam Ibnul Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, commenting on a book by Shaykh al-Islam, a book of Adhkar by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, in which he mentions, and it's an interesting book, very, very interesting book. He mentions the benefits of the remembrance of Allah. He says, in the 16th benefit of the remembrance of Allah, he says, أنه يورث حياة القلب, that the remembrance of Allah causes the livelihood of the heart. It causes the resurrection of the heart, for the heart to become alive again. What does that mean? For a heart to become alive again. Can you think? He says one of the benefits of the remembrance of Allah is that it resuscitates, brings life back into the heart. So what does that mean? Yeah, the heart is only alive if it's able to move towards Allah. The minute it stops wanting to move towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like a dead heart. Even if it's pulsating, You know, you can feel it pumping blood. You know, this heart is dead, as good as dead. Why? Because the heart is only there for that purpose, to take you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it's not taking you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's a dead heart. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the benefits of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that it brings life back into the heart. It makes you want Allah. It makes you able to develop resolve and willpower to do something righteous to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. طيب. He says, وسمعت شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله تعالى يقول الذكر للقلب مثل الماء للسمك. He said, I heard Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah saying that dhikr, the remembrance of Allah, for the heart is like water for the fish. Just see the aspect of desperation. Can you see how desperate fish is for water? Likewise is the heart for the remembrance of Allah. We are desperate for the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, فَكَيْفَ يَكُونُ حَالُ السَّمَكِ إِذَا فَارَقَ الْمَاءِ. How do you imagine the state of a fish when it is taken out of water? Dead. Likewise, the heart of the believer is like this. You will not be able to do anything righteous, and you will not be able to do anything to stay away from anything sinful, unless your heart is alive. And your heart is only alive if you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَمِنْ فَوَائِدِ الذِّكْرِ أَنَّهُ قُوتُ الْقَلْبِ وَالرُّوحِ. He says, having brought life back into the heart, if you continue in the remembrance of Allah will be like food for the heart and food for the soul. Food, nourishment. الْقُوتُ لِلْقَلْبِ وَالرُّوحِ. Meaning, it gives you strength. It gives you ability to actually do actions, you know, and go against your whims and desires, and go against shaitan. All of that needs power, right? This is only possible with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, and this is the part that I wanted to bring to you. He says, فَإِذَا فَقَدَهُ الْعَبْدُ صَارَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْجِسْمِ إِذَا حِيلَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ قُوتِهِ. If you don't do the dhikr of Allah, it will be just like a body that isn't fed. Can you imagine how do you feel if you haven't eaten all day long? How does your body feel? Weak and tired, and maybe you get headache, and you feel like you just want to, you know, drowsy. You know, this is exactly how the soul and the heart feels if you don't feed it the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, one time I prayed Salatul Fajr with Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. You know that Ibnul Qayyim is the student of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. He says, one time I prayed Fajr with him in his masjid. And then he says, فَصَلَّ الْفَجْرَ. He prayed Fajr. ثُمَّ جَلَسَ يَذْكُرُ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى قَرِيبًا مِنْ انْتِصَافِ النَّهَارِ. He says he stayed after Fajr doing dhikr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until it was almost the middle of the day, like around 10 o'clock-ish. ثُمَّ الْتَفَتَ إِلَيَّ. He turned around and Ibn al-Qayyim was there waiting for him. قَالَ هَذِهِ غَدْوَتِي وَلَوْ لَمْ أَتَغَدَّ الْغَدَاءَ سَقَطَتْ قُوَّتِي أَوْ كَلَامًا قَرِيبًا مِثْلَ هَذَا. He says, this is my morning meal. If I don't feed myself, I won't be able to do anything righteous for the rest of the day. If I don't have my meal in the morning, all my powers will go away, and I won't be able to do anything righteous for the rest of the day. Right? And he said in another narration that he says that he sat all day in the morning repeating one dua. And that dua is what? Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum. All morning, from after Fajr until the middle of the day. The middle of the day, as in around 10 o'clock. Right? He says what? Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum. And he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, these two names, they have a special impact of resurrecting the heart and resuscitating the heart, bringing life back into the heart. These two names, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum. And then برحمتك أستغيث أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي طرفة عين. The point here is, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, ليس في طباع العبد الهداية إلى ذلك. It is not within you to be able to find guidance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without Allah's assistance. It is impossible. In fact, he says, بل متى وكل إلى طباعه حيل بينه وبين ذلك كله. If you were to be left for your own devices, you will be unable to achieve none of the grades of guidance that we mentioned earlier. Right? You won't be able to know what is right from what is wrong. You will not be able, you won't have any keenness to seek any Islamic knowledge. Haven't learned anything, you will not know how to make, what to make with of it, how to implement it. You will not have the desire for it. You can't be sincere. If you are sincere, you won't be able to do it according to the Sunnah of Rasulullah, and so on and so forth. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَهَذَا هُوَ الْإِرْكَاسِ. This is the irkas which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala done to the hypocrites. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the hypocrites in a state of irkas, meaning he flipped their hearts upside down. And how did he do that? In the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, by simply abandoning them, just leaving them. You know, they betrayed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They ran away with almost 1/3 of the army when the Prophet was most desperate for more soldiers in his army. They went out with him, and then they came back with 1/3 of the army. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, these people, Allah returned them to how they were. They were almost there becoming Muslims, but Allah returned them to become proper kafirs, right? Proper disbelievers. Why? He just abandoned them. Arkasahum. So if, may Allah save us all, if anyone is abandoned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no way for them to find any guidance. In fact, your own nafs will take you back to misguidance and destruction. Imam Shanqiti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says in his book Adwa al-Bayan, commenting in this verse, فَمَا لَكُمْ فِي الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِئَتَيْنِ وَاللَّهُ أَرْكَسَهُمْ بِمَا كَسَبُوا. He says, وَيُؤْخَذُ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْآيَاتِ أن العبد ينبغي له كثرة التضرع والابتهال إلى الله أن يهديه ولا يضله. One thing we can benefit from this ayah, this is Imam Shanqiti, he says, one thing we can learn from this is one has to always desperately beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide him and never to leave him to his own devices. طيب. لماذا؟ لأن الله قال ومن يضلل الله فلن تجد له سبيلا. Whoever Allah leaves to go astray, you will never find anyone who can give them guidance. He says, فَإِنَّ مَنْ هَدَاهُ اللَّهُ لَا يَضِلُّ وَمَنْ أَضَلَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي. And then it is also because of this. You find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the beginning of Surah Al-Imran, he speaks about the ulama that are well-founded on knowledge. They are well established in Islamic knowledge. He calls them الراسخون في العلم. طيب. At the beginning of Surah Al-Imran, he says الراسخون في العلم, they have one dua which they make desperately. What do they say? ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا. Oh Allah, do not take us away from the path after you have guided us. So this is something that you should also include in your dua. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that the scholars, the proper scholars who are established upon knowledge, say this dua, in other words, he's telling you, this is a dua that you should also be saying. What do you say? ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. طيب. He says رحمه الله تعالى والرب تبارك وتعالى. So this is الصراط المستقيم. الصراط المستقيم, that there is no way for you to be on it, to know it, to stay on it, except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides you and assists you. طيب. And for that, you will be desperate to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. He moves on and he says, وَالرَّبُّ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may he be exalted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he himself, listen to this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is something very profound, and a lot of the times we lose sight of it. And it impacts our attitude and our mindset. He says, Allah himself is upon a straight path. Like, what does it mean that he is upon a straight path? It means that he also acts according to what is just and what is fair and what is the truth. And why is this worrying? It is very worrying if Allah deems you unfit for guidance. That's very worrying, because part of him being on a straight path, part of him being upon righteousness, if it is not right to gift you guidance, then Allah will deny you it. So that is very concerning, very concerning. Allah being upon a straight path. He says, وَرَبُّ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى عَلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ فِي قَضَائِهِ وَقَدَرِهِ. He's on a straight path concerning what he decrees upon his creation. وَنَهْيِهِ وَأَمْرِهِ. What he legislates, what he commands people to do, what he prohibits people from doing. This is all according to الصراط المستقيم. فَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. So he guides whom he wills to the straight path. Look, he guides whom he wills. Growing up as a teenager, I used to think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whomever he wills and misguides whomever he wills. I mean, it's all up to him. And I used to think that, wow, what chances do we have? You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just does it randomly. But the answer is no. يهدي من يشاء. He guides whom he wills based on his wisdom, based on his knowledge. Not randomly, not how he feels, you know. We sometimes act like this when we act as we will. It means that there is some sort of randomness to it, depending on how you feel in that day, right? But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says he guides whom he wills, his will, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is based on his wisdom and his infinite knowledge. Right? Which can be comforting. When you act righteously, you will know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let you down. Why? Because he is upon a straight path. And it is also very extremely worrying when you are not acting righteously. You should be extremely worried. What if Allah decides that you are no longer fit for guidance and he takes that away from you? So always be mindful that Allah himself is upon a straight path. You know, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all about the truth. Whatever is right, Allah will make it happen. Right? So he says, فَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. Whoever he wills, based on his guidance, he will guide them to the straight path. بِفَضْلِهِ وَرَحْمَتِهِ. Due to his bounty and his mercy. وَجَعْلِهِ الْهِدَايَةَ حَيْثُ تَصْلُحُ. شوف. وَجَعْلِهِ الْهِدَايَةَ حَيْثُ تَصْلُحُ. And he will put guidance where it benefits. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only places guidance where it benefits. He will not give guidance to somebody who is unfit for it, whereby this guidance will not be beneficial to them. There's a section of Imam Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala's book, Sayyid al-Khatir. He says, when you give knowledge, when you share Islamic knowledge, you have to be selective who you give it to. He says, he says a person that endows with gold and silver and necklaces the necks and the ears of monkeys, donkeys, and pigs, the fault is not theirs, the fault is his. For placing this precious knowledge in the hands to people, in the ears of people who are not worthy of it. He says even a scholar has to be careful where they place their knowledge. Not everybody will benefit from this knowledge. This knowledge, he says, you only give it to the people who are worthy of it. Where do we learn this from? He says we learn this from Allah. Allah only gives guidance to those who are deserving of it. And when we say deserving of it, those who have proven that whenever they get guidance, they make use of it. Right? If you prove to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in multiple instances that you are the type of person who hears the most precious form of guidance from one ear, and you let it go out from the other ear, and you don't do anything with it, Allah will give you one chance, a second chance, a third chance. But eventually, if he gifts you guidance again, he will not be the all-wise. Wouldn't you agree? So this is something that we should worry about a lot. This question, What if Allah decides that I am not worthy of guidance? Where else will you find guidance? That's very, very serious question, Allah. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَجَعْلِهِ الْهِدَايَةَ حَيْثُ تَصْلُحُ. Allah will put this guidance where guidance benefits. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala see that this guidance in this person's heart will be of no use, of no fruit, then Allah will decide not to place guidance in this particular heart. وَيَصْرِفُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ عَنْ صِرَاطِهِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ بِعَدْلِهِ وَحِكْمَتِهِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will turn someone's away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his adl, with his justice, and with his hikmah. بِعَدْلِهِ وَحِكْمَتِهِ. Not dhulm, not oppression. He will not be wrong in them, but because he gifted them something at the beginning, and they decided that they no longer need it. And he decided that he will no longer give them the same. He says, لِعَدَمِ صَلَاحِيَّةِ الْمَحَلِّ. Because the place is not suitable for guidance, is not beneficial for guidance, will not benefit from guidance. وَذَلِكَ مُوجِبُ صِرَاطِهِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ الَّذِي هُوَ عَلَيْهِ. This is what is necessitated by the straight path upon which Allah Azza wa Jalla is himself. Allah himself is upon a straight path. Do you understand what that means? He only acts righteously. He only does things based on wisdom. He only does things based on justice and fairness, and also mercy and kindness. But he will only place that where it will give fruits. Okay? So this is something that we should all be asking ourselves the question, how many times have Allah seen you being gifted guidance and you abandoned it? Allah gave you the seed, you placed it in your heart, but you never watered it. If Allah Azza wa Jalla has seen this repeat action, this behavior enough times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decide you're no longer worthy of it. In Surah Hud, chapter 11, verse 56, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي تَوَكَّلْتُ عَلَى اللَّهِ رَبِّي وَرَبِّكُمْ. I have put my trust on Allah, my Lord and your Lord. This is whom? Hud alayhi salam. Hud alayhi salam, by the way, is a prophet that we haven't got in the Quran any statement or any verse suggesting what was his miracle, what was his actual miracle. So some ulama, they said that he came with a miracle, but it was not mentioned explicitly. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in general that for every nation he sent them with the prophet that came with the miracle to them. Other scholars, they said this was his miracle, the challenge. He challenged his people. He says, I put my trust on Allah. All of you bring all your gods, bring all your armies, and try to harm me. You will not succeed. This verse, he says, Inni tawakkaltu ala Allah. His reliance on Allah was his miracle. He says, Inna tawakkaltu ala Allahi rabbi wa rabbikum. I am putting my trust in Allah, my Lord and your Lord, the one who is in charge of me and you. And he says, Ma min dabbatin illa huwa akhidun binasiyatiha. There is no creature on this planet except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has got control of his forelock. You know the forelock is the hair that comes from the front of the horse, right? And holding that means that you got good control. So it's like an expression. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has full control of all his creation, right? And then he says, Inna Rabbi ala siratin mustaqim. My Lord is upon a straight path. What is he saying when he said, my Lord is on a straight path? As a conclusion to this, can you think of what does that mean? Yes. Huh? Yeah. What is he saying? He's saying that if I trust Allah like this, it is not the way of Allah to let down anyone who trusts him. Why? Because my Lord is upon a straight path. Somebody who's on a straight path will never let his people who are reliant on him, he will never let them down. This is the sign of him being on a straight path. Like, Inna Rabbi ala siratin mustaqim. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, inshallah, and with this we conclude. He says, فَهُوَ عَلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon a straight path. وَنَصَبَ لِعِبَادِهِ مِنْ أَمْرِهِ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا. And he set for his servants, for his creation, a straight path from his commands. So he commanded them for something that is always the truth, something that is always righteous, something that is always based on kindness. All right? Whoever follows that, they will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَنَصَبَ لِعِبَادِهِ مِنْ أَمْرِهِ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا دَعَاهُمْ جَمِيعًا إِلَيْهِ حُجَّةً وَعَدْلًا. So with the invitation, he made an invitation for all of them to join this path. You know, as a way of what? Justice, showing justice. He will never punish people without showing them the path. So the invitation was to all. He says, دَعَاهُمْ جَمِيعًا إِلَيْهِ حُجَّةً وَعَدْلًا, to establish evidence against them if they choose to deny, and to be fair to them. And then he says, وَهَدَى مَنْ شَاءَ مِنْهُمْ إِلَى سُلُوكِهِ. The invitation was for all, but then guidance was only for those whom he willed to guide. You know, why did he will to guide them? Not that anything? For those who Allah decided to guide them. Some he did not, he only invited them, but he did not guide them to come in. He did not assist them. Like he left them. They didn't have it in their hearts. They did not love guidance. You know? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَهَدَيْنَاهُمْ فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَى عَلَى الْهُدَى. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Thamud, the tribe which Allah destroyed, he said we guided them, the first type of guidance. You know, we said the first type is hidayatul dalala wal irshad. We showed them the path. We showed them what is right and what's wrong. But then when they realized that what is righteous is not consistent with their desires, rather than loving it, they hated it. So the minute they hated it, Allah deemed them as unfit to be given assistance for further guidance. So he says, أَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَهَدَيْنَاهُمْ فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَى عَلَى الْهُدَى. They loved blindness over guidance. Yeah. You know, we all have desires, right? When these desires take hold of us, when we see the truth, we will feel uncomfortable with the truth, because the truth will take us away from our desires. So where does the struggle begin? Begin in convincing ourselves that the truth is where the real benefits are. You know, so these people, Thamud, they thought that their interests, their gains, and their profits are with their desires, not with the truth. So they loved their desires more than the truth. The minute this became their mindset, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided not to guide them ever again. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ibn Qayyim says here, وَهَدَى مَنْ شَاءَ مِنْهُمْ إِلَى سُلُوكِهِ نِعْمَةً مِنْهُ وَفَضْلًا. So he guided those who have shown this in their hearts. They decided that acting righteously is more beneficial to me than whatever I desire. You know, whatever whims and desires, whatever thoughts, you know, from my nafs or from shaitan, if they are not consistent with what Allah said, I am happy to relinquish all of that, to let go of all of that. Why? Because I wholeheartedly believe that my Lord, Allah, is upon a straight path, and He only commands you, He only commands me to do something that is also on a straight path. Something that is full of khair, full of righteousness, full of goodness, and therefore, no matter what I think, I will always favor what Allah has decided for me. طيب. ولم يخرج سبحانه وتعالى بهذا العدل وهذا الفضل عن صراط المستقيم الذي هو عليه. So in doing that, in showing guidance to some, only directing them to the path and then letting them go without assistance, and to others He showed them the path, but He assisted them as well. He's also remaining on the straight path Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we find that this is basically from the Quran, directly from the Quran. In Surah Yunus, chapter 10, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُو إِلَى دَارِ السَّلَامِ. Allah invites people to the Dar salam, the abode of peace, Jannah, in which there is no sicknesses, no diseases, no old age, nothing destructive. That's Dar salam, the abode of peace and happiness. So the invitation is for His Wallahu yad'u ila dar salam, and then He says, وَيَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ إلى صراط المستقيم. He gives guidance to those whom He will to the straight path. Not everybody will be given that straight path. So what we can conclude our session today, and this is really an important conclusion, is if you want to remain on the path of guidance, if you want to be persistent in always doing righteous deeds, you need to know that this begins by you realizing your desperation for Allah to assist you. And to say this dua al-Fatiha in your salat with the heart that is actually desperate. When you say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, engage with it. Ask Allah for this, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim. And in the morning, make sure you do this dua. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith. Repeat it as many times as you can. Right? In the morning and in the evening, Adhkar al-Masa, Adhkar al-Sabah. And in between, keep moving your tongue. Because remind yourself that desperate people are always mentioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The minute you forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are in a state of heedlessness because you forgot that you are desperate to Allah. So the ulama, they said, this sickness, one of the sicknesses we mentioned, the 5 sicknesses, is ghafla. Ghafla begins by forgetting that you are desperate to Allah. And then everything else collapses. So if you want to make sure that you don't forget, you don't get in a state of heedlessness, always move your tongue. Move your tongue with the remembrance of Allah. طيب. We'll stop here بإذن الله تعالى. بارك الله فيكم. جزاكم الله كل خير. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in knowledge. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid us and assist us in acting upon the knowledge. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us firm upon righteousness, to help us purify our heart, discipline our souls. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a good end for our lives so that we can meet Him whilst He's pleased with us. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.